Hey everybody, welcome along. Thanks very much for joining us for Startup Hiring, part of the Bristol Technology Festival. I'm Alan, and here with John. So what we're going to do today is run through some bits about the world of hiring now, because there's no doubt it's different than it was maybe 18 months or so ago. And also particularly for those of you that are in the startup world, talk about how you can get that hiring right, or at least improve your hiring with limited resources, because we know that there's realities of running a startup, and hopefully a lot of the things we'll talk about today will speak to that. So there's some slides that we're going to run through, which I'll bring up now, and part of that will be kind of introducing myself and John. So let me just share those now. Here we are. So we're ISL Recruitment, obviously really proud to be invited as part of the Bristol Technology Festival to share what we're talking about today. So a bit of background, there's me on the right there, John on the left, and a few of our team who are out. We've got a bit more freedom now over in Bath a few weeks back. The business that we work for is ISL Recruitment. So we're a technology recruitment business based in Bristol. Been around for 14 years now, obviously ups and downs over that time, particularly the last 18 months. Really proud that we do a good job for clients, but also, as you might imagine, with the business that we're in, then the people within the business are really important. So we've been a great place to work, awarded by UK Best Workplaces 3 of the last 4 years. We work with other organisations to help kind of founders hire better. So I personally kind of work with a few people like the Accelerator Network, helping seed and pre-seed and Series A stage startups, people like Digital Catapult and particular programs around immersive and cyber and AI, and then some broader kind of talent things like techSPARK Charter, really good organisation for helping improve diversity in tech, and Founders for Schools about connecting employers and education. So hopefully from what we'll cover today, it's our experience, but also that wider ecosystem, and sort of showing that we understand what it is to be a startup founder and go through that process from the clients we've worked with, but also the journey that we've gone through as a business ourselves. Some of the clients we work with, you might have heard of, some maybe not so much. So a few kind of logos here to kind of illustrate. So Yapily, actually, John, I think, was it their first employee pretty much that you placed a few years ago?
Yeah, I think it was back in 2018, actually, first ever, third person in the business after the CTO. So yeah, that's a really good example of a business we've worked with through a few stages. I think they raised a Series A back in March last year, and then a Series B, $50 million or so back in July time. So that's definitely a business that we've worked with from that startup stage through to clearly kind of the scale up and the venture stage they're at now. A couple of people closer to home in Bristol. So Andaris has been a really good customer over the last 6-12 months, helping them with their core team in Bristol to support the people they have in the business. I think sort of 300 employees across Europe. And then a business that's much more that startup stage. So Looping, we've been working with recently and helping them map out the 2 to 5 hires they want over the next 6 months, not just in terms of providing candidates, but also making sure that we can give advice on planning and what the market looks like and how to maximize the resources they've got. So our kind of purpose of business is about helping to build great scale-ups, and a lot of that is helping the people in the business flourish, whether that's those that are in the business at the moment and helping with things like retention and onboarding, and helping to make sure that we can find them great people as well. So I've worked in recruitment for coming up for 20 years or so now, and ISL is business that I run with my partner, Henry. John, it'd be great to just get a brief sense of who you are and what you're all about. Yeah, so I'm John, and I've worked with Alan for the last 7 years, so half the time of the ISL has been around. Within that time, I've done a few different roles, I would say, but most recently, client services manager. So that involves sort of doing a lot of external stuff with clients, so meetups, building up community, kind of getting our external brand out there to clients. As well as that, I do the hands-on side of recruitment as well. So a lot of it's around sort of data science and tech hiring in general, but we've had a focus more recently on sort of C-level hires and building out that founding team. So yeah,
great, thanks, John. So and what we're going to run through today is give a bit of context, but probably run through 5 main areas, from how to plan your talent strategy to how to really tell your story, through to how to make sure you're retaining your people and not just focus on that recruitment side of things. So to give a bit of context before we do that, John, one thing to mention, actually, with sharing my screen, I can't see any comments. If there's any questions that people have, then do throw them in, and John can kind of triage those. But hopefully we'll talk for maybe 25 minutes and also leave a chance for any questions at the end. So if there's anything on your mind, throw it in now, save it to the end, and we'll make sure we touch on it along the way. So I guess if you're here or if you're listening to this after the event, then no doubt it's because you recognize that people are going to be a really important part of growing your startup and helping you to scale and make an impact in what you're doing. The graphic on the left here, it's clearly, along with things like there not being a market for what you're building and not having the finance that is a really valuable part of that investment journey, is not having the right team, whether it's the team you've got now or the team you're going to build. It's really expensive if you get it wrong. So average of £30,000, maybe 6 months lost productivity, other surveys have said. But whether it's time, money, emotional turmoil, whatever it may be, a combination of these things, then having to get it right when you've got it wrong to begin with is really painful. And there's no doubt, there's no silver bullet. You're never going to guarantee to hire perfectly. But a lot of the time, as HBR say here, you can track back that challenging turnover, the lack of retention, down to bad hiring decisions in the first place. And as we've seen, the last 6 to 10 months, pretty much over the whole of 2021, it's a really challenging market to find good people. It feels like you can't stumble across a founder who's not hiring at the moment. I think I read that 100 new businesses have been created every hour this year in the last 12 months. So there's a lot of competition there for people looking to build things in any sector, but definitely in the technology sector that we're closest to. You might have read about Great Resignation, and a lot of people have obviously gone through a loss in the last 18 months, whether it's a loss of their health, a loss of a loved one, a loss of a job, or just a loss of liberty and freedom. We're all kind of gone through a process where we've grieved something, and there's no doubt as part of that, people look at their job, and this is something we'll touch on a bit later, and reflect on what's important to them. So there's a lot of change in the market, a lot of people looking for new things, which is great in terms of you can actually take advantage of that and really bring some great talent into your business. But also it is a really competitive market. So what we'll talk about today will not mean that you're guaranteed to win every time, but at least will make you better at playing the game of trying to bring great talent into your business to help build something special and for it to flourish. So the first thing I'm going to touch on is actually your talent strategy, your talent plan. And one of the mistakes that I see people make is being too short term here. So only planning for today and not thinking about tomorrow or the next steps in their journey. So sometimes that can mean that you move too much role to role. So maybe you think, well, I need a salesperson, so I focus all my efforts on that. And then you hire that salesperson. Maybe it takes you a bit longer than you thought because you have to get up and running. And then you need an engineering person and you have to start all over again. And actually, that's very much a symptom of kind of being too short term in your focus. And one of the issues there is that you'll burn a lot of valuable resources and you'll fail to kind of build for the longer term. So more positively, what can you do? Well, it's very much about being flexible. And I guess that kind of applies in a few different senses of the word. So no surprises, I'm going to mention flexible working because that is clearly a core offering that you need now in some form or other to be able to attract the best talent. And that's clearly something that, John, I guess from your point of view, I imagine many of the candidates you're talking to now put that kind of front of mind when they're asking about new roles.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think probably the biggest change that we've seen coming out of the pandemic, and whether you're a candidate or a client or tried hiring before, like you said, the market's changed massively in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. People are looking for things differently. I think people reflected on their own lives and what they're looking for. And more than anything, people are looking for, I think, probably the three key things are kind of purpose, flexibility, and then finally money. And it goes in that order. We were doing a talk recently, Alan, where we talked about sort of sustainability goals and how companies can offer different things, whether that's sort of around climate change or equality or anything to kind of better the world. And the more that I'm speaking to candidates, the more that is becoming a big part of their desire to move. Clearly, the market's going crazy and salaries are going mad and there's loads of jobs out there. But probably the key thing that people are looking for is kind of that purpose and also the flexibility of working, whether that's remote working or just being treated like an adult. being able to kind of work around their lifestyle rather than living to work.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that flexibility angle also comes into you as a founder, excuse me, being flexible on the roles you're looking to bring into the business. So I think there's something about us all having worked remotely for a lot of the last 18 months that by its nature means that people are more comfortable with working with others for a short period of time. So I think historically, a lot of the default was, well, let's have somebody permanently that we have for a few years and that we invest in 365 days a year. And that can obviously be quite costly, particularly if you have retention issues. We've definitely seen a lot more people that are looking at interns or short-term hires, contractors, interims to do a particular job, get them to the next milestone, and then actually maybe later on invest in someone on a permanent basis. And obviously there's a benefit in being able to bring someone in quickly, and potentially that would buy you time if you're being flexible around the right permanent hire. So John, I think you had an example recently of a business you'd worked with, IGO, where we'd done exactly that and kind of given them a mix of flexible options to help what they needed to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So every business is going to have different needs in terms of when they need people on board or why they need them. So I think it's really important to kind of understand the long-term goals, like Alan said. And company IGO in particular, we were speaking to a couple of months back, and they gave out their entire sort of pipeline over the next 6 months in terms of who they needed to hire and the reasons for it. And particularly to them, they were going through a kind of transformation project where they were building version 2 of their product. And so they could kind of see the time scales that needed. And originally they were asking me to find a lot of permanent people for the same reasons that Alan mentioned, is that they wanted those people kind of bought in and they could see those grow throughout that project. One of the challenges with that is that a lot of people have got long notice periods, whether that's a month or 3 months or sometimes even longer. So by the time they had to actually get the platform built, they were going to be waiting maybe 3 to 4 to 5 months before they actually had anyone on board. So we talked around their kind of needs and goals. We realised actually it's probably easier to get some contractors in short term that could hit the ground running and start building on that platform and do the sort of the heavy lifting in terms of the technical side of things. And then that frees up time to kind of find the right people for the business, rather than having to just rush in and hire somebody for the sake of it because they're available now. Find the people that are available, that are right for the business, that are available right now. And so now, yeah, we've got the contracts on board and they're doing a really good job. But now we are focusing on the permanent hires and able to kind of fulfill their strategy long term for them as well.
I think one of the things that really helps there around that planning is to create organizational charts. So to have one for maybe the next couple of hires prioritized, but for the next 6 to 12 months, and then maybe one that's more medium term, sort of 2 to 3 years, depending on the transitions you think you'll go through as a business, maybe depending on things like the runway you have, if you're gaining investment and using that to help map through the hires you're planned. I think the final point here before we move on is around the flexibility as to what you can offer somebody. So that ties into things like benefits, but one of the things I've seen a few companies do well is if they, for example, have limited resources in terms of cash, then a lot of the reasons that people will join startups is they know there's no guarantee and there's a lot of risk to that journey, but clearly they would hope to share in some of the upside for the value they might create. So using options is an obvious way to make sure you can attract good talent. I would say don't expect people to work for free just because you're giving them options, because maybe that will appeal to you or your founding team, but probably not to the wider market. But you can definitely think about being flexible with the options and the salary you offer. So one of the clients I worked with previously, who was hiring for data scientists, they would typically be hiring at a salary level you'd say that market was around about 80,000. So they would offer 80,000 and a small amount of options, but they would also give each candidate 3 offers. So as well as the 80 and a few options, they would give them 70 and, you know, maybe a few times more options. And they would then give them 55, I think it was, and a huge amount of options. So they were being flexible with the resources they had and also attracting a broader range of talent where someone may need, for whatever reasons, the stability and the security of a higher basic. Other people perhaps have a different risk profile, different life circumstances, and were more willing to take the upside potential there through the equity in trade for some of the salary as well. So think about what you're offering, and it doesn't all have to be about cash, although like John mentioned, that's clearly important to people. Be flexible in terms of the options you're offering. So yeah, when it comes to talent strategy, then I guess flexibility is definitely one of the things that we'd say put at the core. Onto employer brand, and to me, this is really about storytelling. I think that one of the things that I see people do not so well here, this is from a job board with some Bristol companies, but probably to illustrate the point more around the careers section of a website. I remember being at a Set Squared event a few years ago and hearing someone talk about a great business they were building and the technology that was part of it. And there was engineers in that audience that would have been great potential hires. And chatting to the founder afterwards, he was bemoaning the lack of ability to find good people, but jump onto the startup's website and there wasn't even this, there was no job titles on this. There was nothing to signal to people that they were hiring. I think you can do so much more than that. So actually, okay, job titles on your website, a careers page is kind of table stakes, but actually building on that, make sure you're telling a really clear story of what it's like to work within your business. So don't limit your job site or your postings on social media to simply job titles and locations, but you can make it much more than that. And I think a big part of that is, like I mentioned, around the storytelling. So actually making sure that you are not relying on meeting people in person. I was talking to a founder recently and they said, well, when I get to interview somebody, I can tell them the dream of the business and sell them, the opportunity that's here, which is great. And that's a really valuable skill. But if you're relying on doing it in person, you're going to be missing out on so much talent. I mean, I guess, John, even though we're passing on that story from our clients to our candidates, you must see a difference when you're talking to candidates around businesses, startups that have a really strong digital story and digital presence versus those that don't, and how that kind of gives them traction or loses them traction with good people that you're talking to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it comes in two senses as well. There's the story around the job and understanding what they're going to be doing in that role and envisioning themselves in the future and being part of that business. But it also comes down to some of the things that aren't necessarily around the role itself. It's around what's that company like and what's the culture like. Most sort of younger people now, the first thing that they will do when they're looking for a role is look on Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook or whichever social media outlet that might be, and see, okay, how do these people interact? What do they do in their spare time? Things like that. And those kind of things are so important to people at the moment. So if you might be doing all those things, but unless you're portraying them to the outside world, you're really missing the trick. And it's almost free to do. You just need to take some pictures and some videos of some of the stuff that you're doing with the team, and just make sure that you're sharing them and telling that story about who you are.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And there's no doubt that a lot of the people that we work with, the founder story is really important. But John's point there in terms of showcasing the team is perhaps even more so. If I'm a UX designer looking to come into a business or a data scientist, then of course part of the buy-in with a startup is the founder and their story and what she might be telling me about, why she set the business up and what she's looking to build. But I also want to see people like me, data scientists or UX designers or just the broader team. I want to understand why they joined, why they're staying, what their hopes are for the future. So, I think if you go to your existing team, whether that's 2 of you or 10 of you, and talk about why you're there within the business and why you enjoy working there, then that's a useful exercise in itself to get that feedback and make sure your employer brand is authentic and genuine. But then, like John said, whether it's either a post on Instagram or a short written post on LinkedIn, whatever the appropriate channel and medium for you, is actually bringing that story to life externally. So you don't have to rely on people seeing you in person to make that connection or to get that sense of, well, this is what life could be like if I was to join this business and this startup. So definitely, I think in terms of the employer branding side of things and the storytelling, don't leave it to chance and make sure you're being really clear out there. And then the second point here is definitely around that feedback. So both in terms of feedback from your existing team to make sure it's authentic, but when people come and join you, and actually when they say yes or they say no, then get some feedback on what it is that resonated with them. And is it that you're asking them to engage with the team, but it's at a really late stage in your hiring process? And if you brought that forward, you'd get much stronger engagement and traction and avoid losing too many people along the way. So I'm going to move on to talk about power of your network. Just before I do, John, anything else you wanted to add on the employer branding side of things here?
I think, well, people are so bought into brands now. You can tell from looking online or whatever that, especially younger people, they kind of hang their hat on which brands other people are engaging with and all the rest of it. So where you are a startup, whether you're using a recruiter or working on your own, you can really build that and try to build that brand. I think probably a good example is obviously as recruiters, when we are advertising roles, we often don't say who the company is until we get on the phone to somebody and start talking to them about that business. And part of that's because there might be competition out there and all the rest of it. One of the things we recently did was we worked on a senior level role with a company called Role Mapper, which is a CTO position. And we did a co-branding exercise there. So we acted as their sort of the face of the business, and we branded all the adverts with their company name, and we were really able to sort of help share that for them. That showed there was a lot more people that came through those channels that applied to the roles, and the quality and the relevance of those people was so much better. So whether it is that you're using a recruiter or you're doing it by yourself, being able to kind of share that brand and then allow people to look back on your business and look at other parts of what you're doing before they apply to the role, I think is really important.
Yeah, 100%. No, I think that can make a real difference in terms of being able to be transparent about the business you're representing, whether it's either you doing that directly or you're doing it through a third party like us. So the next section is around using your network. And I suppose the slightly obvious point is just don't be quiet, and don't expect your network is going to provide value unless you're being active within it. And that kind of activity can come in a few different ways. I think one of the things I'd emphasize is that when you're thinking about your startup, okay, fine, if it's simply you, then your network is the same as your startup's network. Maybe if you're working with advisors and investors, you can see that broaden. But as you start to bring people into your business, whether it's a founding team or whether it's your first few hires, you should very much see this as a team sport. I think for the best startups, they see every employee in their business being a recruiter. It may be one person's job. So that might be something that you take on as CEO, or you have an internal person who is focused on recruitment and ops, or you outsource that to somebody like ISL. But you shouldn't overlook the impact of the team. So if you've got 10 people, then clearly you've got 10 networks you can leverage. And rather than having a LinkedIn company page with 500 followers, if one of your employees has got 2,000 followers, there's many multiples more people you can reach. And also, I think that John's point earlier on the branding side of things is relevant, but people do obviously connect on a personal level, no matter what it is they're buying, and jobs are a big part of that as well. So if you can create some really good shareable content through your employer branding we just touched on, and actually not simply share that on your company page, but share it on your page, share it on your team's socials as well, you can really maximize that part of your network there. I think the other point here is that if you're looking to use your network, say, for example, you're looking to hire a CTO like the role we hired last week, and one option is to go and speak to 5 CTOs and ask them if they're looking for work. And that might get you results, but I'd probably say to actually go and ask them for advice. So go and speak to 5 CTOs or 5 CEOs if you know them, and ask them about how they hired their CTO, or ask the CTOs how they were hired as CTO. What's their advice to you? What's their experience that's relevant to you in looking for that role? And you'll get some really valuable learnings around why they took the role they did, where they found it, what really appealed to them, what potentially turned them off about other roles. And you can use that to really shape your offering to the market. There's no doubt if you do that, you may get 2 or 3 of them say, well, maybe I'm interested, or maybe I know someone. So I think if you lead with advice, you may still get the hires and the leads. Whereas if you simply go to your network asking for leads, you won't get the advice or the learnings along the way. And maybe you make it more likely that people will give you a swift no rather than a longer term yes once they understand a bit more about what you're building. So I think using your network is really important. Making sure that you can actually see it as a team thing is key. John, in terms of the network side of things, what else have you seen work well here, or are there other mistakes that people might make to not really maximize their resources?
I think on the point you made around asking for advice is definitely a good one. And that's one of the things that I always advise candidates to do as well, is rather than ask for a job, is go to a CEO or CTO and ask for advice on how would you suggest somebody in my situation goes around doing that. So if you are in that position and somebody's coming to ask you for advice and they look like a good candidate, there might be a reason that they're asking you. So I think it's always worth just keeping your eyes peeled around the people that are approaching you and asking you for advice, because there could be a reason that they're doing that. So worth keeping that in mind. I think kind of a real life example of the team sharing different information or adverts or whatever that might be about the company brand is really important. I was recently working with another startup a couple of months back, and I did a post around their business and what they're doing and what they're trying to achieve. And everybody within that business then shared that post or did a post along the lines of what I put. And the engagement that it got was just crazy. The CEO was then getting loads of messages kind of directly before. So we were obviously in a position where we were working them as a recruitment partner, and that's what we do, which is great. But there was nothing that I did there that you can't do as a founder yourself. That's probably one of the quickest and easiest things to do. I think make sure that you're getting people to share, but also make sure that you're putting a call to action in terms of what you're doing. If people are interested, what should they do about approaching you? Is it approach you as the founder or somebody in HR? Make sure that it's really clear around what they should do to get more information or apply to you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think actually getting a team's feedback on what to put in there. I've seen many founders, having their own perspective and being guilty of saying, we are this, we're doing this, we're offering that, and not thinking about that kind of what's in it for me perspective of the potential hire. So actually, what is it you're offering that is a benefit to them, or what is it that they most want to understand? And that sometimes can be different than the things you most want to highlight. So make sure you've put yourself in someone else's shoes and thinking about that potential hire, the journey they might be on, and what is it that is going to give them that initial traction or give you their attention that you can then hopefully build on through a hiring process, whether that's a short interview one or a longer term kind of talent pooling build. So the next part is around diverse thinking, and hopefully that's something that everybody here would now recognize is a key part of building the best business, is making sure you've got that diversity in your business, whether it's the obvious kind of making sure you've got the right kind of appropriate gender balance or things that are perhaps not so easily visible. I think one of the mistakes I see people make here is being really lazy and resorting to defaults. So I really wouldn't advise, if you're looking to hire a VP of sales or a lead engineer, simply googling a job spec or using the one from your last business and just putting that straight out there. Of course, look at what other people have asked for in terms of skills, how they describe roles, and use that to shape your own. But don't simply copy and paste and expect it to be right for your business. I think start with a blank page, and have a real think about which direction you want to go in with that particular role. You don't need to simply follow the Joneses, and actually you need to make sure that it's going to resonate with the market, whether it's either the job title you're using or the key things that come into the role and responsibility. But really take a fresh approach to things and sort of start with a blank page and think about, well, what's the purpose of this role and what sort of person do I need? Don't write down 10 or 15 essential skills when actually you really don't need all those things. I think that partly males will apply to roles where they maybe meet 3 or 4 of the 10 criteria, whereas females will need to see 8 or 9 before they apply. So there's some issues there around not getting a representative applicant pool. Also things like looking at gender decoding your advert to again make sure that language is being inclusive. I'd encourage you to always talk about your values first. So I was talking to a founder who was building something within the manufacturing sector a few months back, and talking to him on the phone, the most important thing to him was to make sure he didn't bring any jerks into the business. So he had 2 words at the end of his advert, which was no jerks. But talking to him, that was the most important thing. So we worked and changed the advert that he'd written. The first 2 paragraphs were effect and expansion of that no jerks policy, but more positively, what the values of the business were, what the culture the sort of people that he wanted to join in his journey. And a couple of weeks later, when I caught up with him, he had a much stronger group of people applying, maybe slightly less in some ways, but people that were so much more bought into what he was building, and actually it really resonated with them, rather than simply seeing the job title, seeing the salary and applying for those reasons. There was much more impact that he'd made from that advert, that also brought in a much diverse range of talent, people that were looking at the values rather than self-selecting on years of experience or years of education or qualifications. So really have that kind of that values first approach. John, in terms of other ways people have kind of brought great diverse talent into the business, what have you seen work well, or other issues you've seen here?
I think a lot of it's probably just going on from what you said. It's diversity is often seen as, whether it's male or female, or whether it's race or whatever that might be, or something very visual, but it could be any number of things. So I don't think it's necessarily a case of thinking, right, we want this within our business, but it's making sure that people feel they're able to apply to the position that you've got. I think, expanding on one of the things you mentioned around how roles are written, a couple of years back, one of the women in my team, we were talking, and she found that out of the last 10 placements she did, like most of them were all ladies. And I look back and I realised that I'd hardly placed any women at all, or never got any women that applied to my adverts. And when we looked at what those reasons are, I was writing adverts that I would want to apply to, and she was writing adverts that she would want to apply to. So again, talking about the story and the values, it's making sure that you're not getting a tick box list of things, because as you said, Alan, women tend to self-reject a lot easier than men do. Men will typically say, well, yeah, I'll give it a go, or I'll apply to it and see what happens. So make sure that you're telling that story. And if you've got things that need to be put in there, maybe talk around, would this be something that would be interesting for you to do? Do you feel that this would be an exciting opportunity, an exciting space for you to be in? And try to use gender neutral terms. There's a lot of sort of technology out there that you can use, both free and paid for, but a lot of it is just making sure that you're consciously taking out any of the biased language in there, or looking at why different people might apply to things.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the other key things here is that think about it in terms of your assessment process. So I think there's some really good examples of people who have put the CVs to one side in terms of how they assess. There's there's research out there that shows things like years of experience, years of education, the companies people worked with are a really poor predictor of future performance. Whereas actually things like work samples and cognitive ability tests and some neuroscientific examples of assessments are a much stronger indication of someone's likely future value. They're predictors of their performance in the future. So there's a business in the UK called Corrie Kids, where Rachel Carroll, the founder there, talks on their Twitter feed, which you can look at, and also on their website, really well about the process they've gone through, where they've blinded the process, so they've anonymized CVs. But probably more importantly and more usefully, they look at work samples. So if they're hiring for a digital marketing manager, they will get those applicants to answer maybe a 5-10 minute question on how they would launch a campaign on Facebook, or how they would write copy for a particular landing page. And I think you'll find a few benefits there. You'll find that people that can't do it don't do it. You actually will put off the people that might have flung you their CV otherwise, but not quite be right for it. But also, if you have 10 or 100 or 1,000 people apply, whatever it is, then more so than sifting through CVs, you'll find you've got much richer and much more valuable insight into their ability to do the job, rather than trying to skim through a CV and looking at their job title and looking at the company and risking all sorts of bias or making far too many assumptions around the value they have from you. If you ask the right questions, then you'll be getting answers that are much more relevant to what you're looking to build and what you're looking to hire to help you build that as well. So the final thing we're going to talk about, or actually, sorry, the next thing we're going to talk about is retention. The final thing we'll leave you with is just if you're thinking about your next hire, some maybe 10 or 12 steps you can go through to make sure that you maximize your chance of bringing the right person on board. So hopefully something really practical to take away. But the final point here is around retention. So we're a business that's in recruitment, so you could argue that actually bad retention is good for our business, but the reality is that we definitely see it as a core part of what we can do as a business is help people from a retention point of view rather than simply help them to bring people on. So actually, if you have leaks in your talent, if it can cause you real pain and damage where you're running really fast and you're trying to hire people, but you're almost losing people at the other end because you don't have that retention focus. And I think that's probably one of the key mistakes. People will put budgets in place for recruitment. They will put resources that are dedicated to recruitment, but sometimes they overlook they can solve some of those future recruitment challenges by being really strong on the retention side of things. John, I know in the last week or so, you've been talking to some of the people that you placed 6-7 years ago, and some have obviously been retained within their companies and some not. And so what have you picked up for what's important from those people you've talked to from a retention point of view?
Well, it's interesting because I started off this talking about the three things that is really important to people, and that's kind of purpose, flexibility within the role, being treated like an adult, and money. And as you might expect, the people that are still in their roles sort of 4, 5, 6 years on from when I first placed them, companies that have given them that. Clearly, the landscape's changed massively. Especially recently, in terms of flexible working and some of the salaries that people are offering, and just making sure that you're keeping up to date with what the market's looking like. You might think that because somebody's been with you for 4 years, that then they're going to be with you forever, but that's really not the case. One of the guys I spoke to in particular, I placed him 4.5 years ago, and he'd recently had a chat with his line manager and talked about some of the challenges it's having and what his future goals are. And they were saying that at the moment his next step is to go into a sort of more management role, which is not something he wants to do. He wants to stay hands-on. And then from going there, he might be able to sort of move elsewhere. And effectively, it was if you want to progress, you need to compromise. Which is fair enough, and he's been really loyal to the business. But he said to me, I know that I could go elsewhere for 30% more in terms of salary and go for the job that I want to. So it's really worth doing your research and speaking to people, understanding what the market is doing, because even if you're looking at competitors that you might have in a business sense, so commercially, you might have your eye on them and be on top of all of those, but you're actually competing with every other business out there, every other tech business. Everybody is your competitor. So it's really worthwhile sort of being on the ball and making sure that you are treating people right and keeping up with the market.
Yeah, 100%. And I think actually one of the things that is much more important now after the last 18 months is that focus on your employees' well-being. So rightly or wrongly, it's become more part of actually what you as a business leader and a founder need to think about. So having that separation from work and home, I'm talking to you from my bedroom. So clearly those lines have been blurred and in some cases kind of just disappeared altogether. And I think there is really a duty of care for an employee, but also in terms of the retention aspect, to think much more holistically and think about the well-being of your employee, both when they are working, when they're not working, and think about how you can be flexible in terms of supporting that on those aspects. John's kind of mentioned a few things that tie into this, but I'm a big fan of what Daniel Pink talks about and check out his TED Talk, where he talks about the surprising truth about what motivates people, and that's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So are you allowing them the freedom to do their job? Are you developing them in terms of that mastery? And definitely what's come out strongly from what John's been saying, and I would back up around that meaning, that impact, that purpose of what they're doing being key, and probably one of those trends the pandemic has accelerated rather than brought in from nowhere, but definitely something that's much more important to people as we stand now. We last year and the year before have done a retention report where we surveyed last year 250 people, this is before the pandemic, who had changed jobs in the previous 4 months, and asked them why they had left their job. So we're in a good position to be able to access those people who are transitioning rather than those people that just saying, well, yeah, I would move for more money, but don't actually make the move. the number one thing was culture, perhaps unsurprisingly, but things like empowerment, accountability, consistency in behaviors were really important to them. So if you're interested in more, then we've got the retention report from last year. We're in the process of kicking off a new one for next year, where I think some of the things will be the same, but clearly things like flexibility, things like well-being, I imagine will be much more important to people and will have made much more a difference with regards to someone's decision to stay or someone's decision to go. So the final thing that I'm going to talk about now is, I suppose, hopefully some practical steps that if you're sitting here listening to what we're saying, hopefully it's resonating with you in some way. You're thinking about that next hire, so a head of sales or a chief technology officer or a lead developer or a marketing exec, whatever it may be. There's 4 stages or 4 aspects that I would think about to make sure you can bring the best people onto your business. So, and some of this links into what we've covered already, but be really clear in terms of that definition stage. So think about the purpose of the role. If you were, one of the ways I like to think about it is, in 18 months' time, if I'd hired this person and I'm having a coffee with them, talking to them over Zoom, sharing a glass of wine, whatever it may be, then what are we celebrating? And hopefully that ties pretty strongly into the purpose of the role, and then starts to actually give me a sense of the performance measures. Is it about reducing churn or optimizing development time or being able to operationalize some of the processes we've got in place? And what does that look like in terms of performance measures? And how does that track through to the capabilities? That attraction stage. So a common mistake is to do a great job description or even a poor job description and to assume that is your advert. It's definitely not your advert. The two shouldn't conflict, and one should definitely influence the other. But being able to gain people's attention and their interest and giving them that desire for what you're offering and that call to action is quite different than what you would have in a job description. So make sure your advert is shorter, sharper, and speaks much more to what appeals to them, whereas your job description is probably a bit more functional. Lead with values, which I've touched on. And then the outreach piece here is, don't simply post an advert on LinkedIn and expect that everybody will go to it. You need to put effort into it. So if you're looking to improve your gender balance in your team, then how can you engage with communities of underrepresented groups that will help you reach that talent more effectively? Can you engage with your local university or education establishments, or can you go to a meetup in Bristol around the marketing side of things or around data science, whatever it is that represents the talent pool you're looking to go into? Make sure that you have a strong assessment process. So don't simply turn up on the day and assume you'll be able to make a gut judgment on the right hire, because the chances are that'll be something that you'll suffer pain for further on down the line. So if you're hiring with other people, make sure going into the interview process, you've got alignment, you've agreed on what good looks like and actually how you're going to measure that. So have a scorecard, even if it's a simple kind of 3-step process and you're rating people good or excellent or unsure, then have it as something to make sure you can move through with a consistent process and to make sure you're not duplicating too much unnecessarily. And then the final thing here is, we see many companies that do a great job in hiring and a really bad job in onboarding. So of course the job is not done once you've had that offer accepted. Think about how you onboard well. There's hygiene factors around getting a contract to someone in a timely fashion, making sure they're set up with laptops, logins, well before they join, even inviting them into your Slack groups or into your all hands, the few weeks before they join to really help that pre-boarding. Have a plan for their first 30, 60, 90 days. We speak to a lot of candidates who join all excited and feel lost because they didn't have that right support over the first 1 or 2 months. And they make the decision to leave quite quickly for a job that otherwise could have been a much longer term bet for them. And also link your onboarding through to the interviews. So when you're talking to people about the interview process around what they're looking for and what's important to them, you'll get some really rich, valuable information. And actually on the first day, being able to go back over that and reinforce that and think about how you can impact their longer term retention can be a really powerful way to maximize the impact of the effort you've put into the hiring process. So I'm going to stop sharing now and hopefully go back to seeing John's face and give us a chance to kind of just sum up, I suppose, but also see if there's any particular questions or comments that people have got. So I guess, John, in terms of summing up some of the things we've talked about today, then what else is it that you'd cover that perhaps we haven't mentioned, or what would you go back over to give people in terms of, a few things to really focus on leaving today?
Yeah, I talked about the things that are important at the beginning. The 3 things is the purpose, the flexibility, and the money. Clearly, this session is around hiring on limited resources. So I think it's best to assume that the money might not be the thing that you can use to sell the role or the business. But actually being a startup and not having all the red tape and the bureaucracy, it's a real big benefit. You've got that flexibility. It allows you to be flexible rather than be stuck with certain things. One of the stories I mentioned earlier with the chap that was looking to leave because he had to go into a people management role was because it was a huge company and they were clearly defined. If you've got somebody that is telling you that is really good and you value them and they are telling you this is what I want with my business, obviously if with my career, sorry, if you can't offer it, then be honest with them. But look at other ways that they can fit in. How can you use their skill set? We've done a lot within our business about understanding people's skill sets and where they can best add value, rather than just kind of forcing people into roles because of it. And I think another thing with regards to that is the purpose side. It's worth just pointing out that when we talk about purpose, people want to be part of a business that's doing bigger things. Whether that's climate change or equality or whatever that might be. But clearly, if you are a business that is a gambling company or a pornography website or something like that, you clearly can't sell on that. But what you can sell on is what is intrinsically purposeful to the candidate, what is going to help them in their career. So I think taking time to really understand at early stages what's going to be important to people. And then setting out a development plan for them, even if it's not set in stone. Talk to them from the early stages about, okay, this is what we can offer you. This is what you want to. This is where you want to be in 3-5 years' time. This is how we can help you on that journey. And that internal thing is their purpose rather than an external purpose.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely. I think about it in terms of if your business is in London at the moment and much more positively looking to move to Bristol, where we all live and love, then actually that may be the journey of your business to move from London to Bristol. But someone else will have different stages of their journey that hopefully link in with yours, but don't mirror yours exactly. So to stretch the analogy, they may be looking to travel from London to Reading or Swindon to Bath. You need to recognize what's important in their personal journey and make sure that you're matching that through to your business journey, but clearly thinking about them first and their business second. So it needs to be both top down and bottom up, but linking those two is a really good way to help you retain people. I think the other couple of things that comes to mind that probably haven't touched on is you need to make sure your hiring process is swift. So we'll see a lot of candidates that could take a job that was really well suited for them, but have pressure on from other opportunities or have a much swifter process. And if someone's having a process that takes 6 or 8 weeks and has steps that too much duplicate or cover things that aren't essential, then they'll lose good people along the way. The purpose side of thing that John's talked about, yeah, massively, I would suggest is important thinking about. There's a bit of content that I'd created for Bristol Tech Festival that links into this, hiring with a purpose post-pandemic, and that's available on the website under the news section. I think the other key kind of things just to touch back on are making sure you're really clear on your storytelling, making sure you're being inclusive in your hiring process and also in the culture you're looking to build and scale. And then clearly having flexibility, both in terms of the way you're working. I'm not saying that everybody needs to be fully remote. You know, it's what's right for your business, but actually making sure you've got an element of flexibility in what you can offer to who is a really good way to make sure you don't lose a lot of the talent pool there that could otherwise be great hires for you. So, John, anything else you wanted to finish up on?
I don't think so. I think you've covered it quite well.
Yeah, brilliant. So thanks very much for listening to us. Definitely, if you want to go back over this, then I think it'll be recorded. More than welcome to connect with John or me. LinkedIn is often where we're hanging out most often. And if you wanted to talk more about any particular hiring challenges you've got, particularly if you're kind of a startup looking to build something, then yeah, John and I would definitely be happy to meet you in Bristol for a coffee, talk to you over Zoom, or just kind of exchange a few emails and see if we can help you in some way. So thank you very much for coming along and joining in.
Thank you.